Bing, was there a day that filmmaking mattered to you more than skateboarding?
There were some days where it did, and some days that it didn't. Um, I think so. When I was 17, I'd watched the film Slacker, and I took the freaks and geeks of my community in Rockford, and I sort of had them improv this talking about their lives, bumping into each other, sort of thing. That's very Slacker-esque. On that day, filmmaking mattered more to me than skateboarding. And then I kept making skate videos, and then my next film that I did, I cared more about filmmaking. I don't know if I'm answering the question or not.
No, you
Yeah.
are. I mean, whenever you take on a project, whether it's having a YouTube channel or doing a documentary, it takes over your life in so many ways. Like, you basically have no free time. This is pretty much what you're doing for a good chunk of time. So was there a point where you said, you know what, I think that I'm going to put skateboarding on the back burner, and to me making this film is like everything and I need to do it for me?
Um, I mean, skateboarding, I feel like it wasn't ever that choice. There was never that fork in the road. I was 24 when I started doing this film. I really wanted to explore these themes of family and violence in childhood. So I went around the country and interviewed skateboarders from all over the place. It confirmed my belief that there's a lot of patterns in the community. And then a year in, I met Kier, and I was like, oh, this person hasn't processed it in the ways that other people have. Like later in the documentary, Zach is like, oh yeah, of course my father, beat me. I feel like most people were brushed it off like that. There's something that had hardened over the softness that Kier still held on to. And that's why I saw myself in Kier, and Kier is willing to do the work of processing it, to not just, brush it off, to make it, something that mattered to him and that he wanted to change.
Yeah, absolutely. He was incredibly open, and I really appreciate that. And speaking of which, and Zach, I think there was one scene early on in the film where Zach kind of looked at you, and he might have been smoking or doing something, and he said, "Are you going to film this?" And then he says, "You know what? You can pretty much film whatever you want." So how do you earn that level of trust with someone, even someone who's a friend? I mean, this thing can shape someone in any way they want it to in the editing room. So how do you earn that level of trust?
I think it was just a 5-year-long conversation about representation. That was one of many moments, both on and off camera, where, we talked about what was going to go in the film, how they felt about what we had captured so far. And sometimes they were, light and funny, like that weed smoking moment. But other times it was like, Zach, how do you feel about me having filmed you run off to Denver? How do you feel about you sort of abandoning your son? So they understood that that I was checking in, that I cared. And I told them a couple years before we finished the film that they were going to get a chance to see the film before it was picture locked and weigh in. So
I'm wondering when you started actually filming videos in general, whether they were skateboarding videos or whatever. When was the first time you picked up a camera?
14, maybe. Yeah.
So pre-DSLR, I guess.
Pre-DSLR, yeah. I mean, it was still mini DV tape was the height of technology at the time, and then soon after, I think recording to DVD came, and then recording to hard drive cameras came.
So I believe initially you weren't intending to put yourself in the film, and I can see why a lot of people have sort of their own take on that. It definitely works, absolutely works that you're in the film. I think you said that at some point your editor and you sat down and you edited all 3 stories separately just to see if they worked. Can you talk about how that worked?
Yeah, I met Josh last year editing a different project, and I convinced him to come on to consult it first because he didn't have time to edit fully, and he told me you should try editing every story on its own to get it working. And so I did that, and on the first try with Kier and Zach's stories, it was like, okay, we have a film here for sure that can get into Sundance. And I was like, what? Because I had, that was the first time someone had told me that. And then for my story, it was like, we're not sure how this is going to work. We'll figure it out later. So we wove Zach and Kier's stories together, and then, ultimately it was sort of characterizing the camera as the character to ultimately lead up to the mom interview.
Right. And how was that to know that it could go to Sundance and beyond? I mean, most people hope for that and they don't actually get it, but then you're filming this incredibly personal story for all parties involved, and to know that, oh my gosh, like this is happening.
Because I wasn't doing it for Sundance. I mean, there's a large part of me that wasn't doing it just to make a film. It was so important to me that I just would have wanted to do it. And I mean, the goal is to try to get it seen very widely so that it can make a difference. I mean, Sundance was great for that purpose, but I'm very much a realist, and I'm just like, and I very much live in the moment. I mean, I'm still sort of waiting to sort of wake up and, oh, none of that happened. Of course, yeah. No, the last 9 months was just a dream. So.
I think that you'd said in a Q&A, or maybe this was someone else, that what's effective about minding the gap is also what's not being said. Is there anything you want to talk about regarding that, in terms of some of the things you just show and some of the things you leave out, and the audience can kind of like fill in the gaps in terms of, and no pun intended, but just like what's actually happening, or some of the emptiness around the lives of the skateboarders?
Yeah, I think it was that first year, those interviews were really on the nose, and that first assembly cut was very much just like people really directly talking about abuse and violence. It was just, really hard to watch, and for many reasons. And then once it became more about a story of Zach and Kira growing up and these issues of abuse and trauma coming out organically as obstacles to their growing up, I think then it became a lot more emotionally grappling. A little does a lot. And I think that ultimately that's how we were able to fit so many themes that are in the film. Race, class, gender relations, masculinity. Because, if you really look at the mechanics of the story, there's really just a 1-2 punch for some of these themes. Like for race, for example, there's really 3 moments that deal with race in the film, but it says everything you need to know about how this affects Kier.
Right. Can you talk about the types of filming when, let's say, you want the subjects to pretend that the camera was not there, and then filming where you do want the subjects to look straight at the camera? How did you balance that? Or was that not even conscious? It was just you were filming?
I wasn't really conscious. I mean, I certainly adhered to verite, the school of verite, which is that, you just hang out and something happens, you start filming. For me, I feel like I watched a lot of verite films that showed how the camera affected the story, and like you felt the presence of the camera. There's something actually more truthful to that. So, I think that's why we left in moments like Zach asking me, like, do you want me to pretend like the camera's not there or what? Because it just, it sort of nods to the fact that, we're both constructing it, and, we're filming things, and the camera might affect how they're acting, but you can't always do that. That would be exhausting, So there's more truth to that, I think.
We asked some of our viewers questions ahead of time. We just let them know that it was a documentary, and we didn't tell them too much, but they had some questions. And they wanted to know, first off, a viewer asked, his name is Zombie Dude 64. He asked,
I love this. This is awesome.
And I'm assuming it's a he. I haven't looked at his account. So what are your tips on finding screenings for the film? How was that?
Finding screenings, like feedback screenings, or?
Yeah, how did you arrange screenings, or was it all festival submissions and that's how?
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, getting into Sundance positions you really well for festivals to come to you. A friend of mine, Stephen Elliott, he's a filmmaker who did this journalistic piece about film fest fees. You should Google it. I mean, it's really telling about, sort of the behind the curtains look of how films get accepted into festivals and the whole microeconomy behind that. And there's unfairness there, but it's like, I think it speaks to being a filmmaker who's independent, making their first film, and having to learn how to play the game while also learning the rules of the game at the same time, and it can be really frustrating. But I think, these things always change. I don't know. I mean, maybe the next film I make will be distributed in a different way. I'll have to apply more. But for the most part, we got into Sundance, won an award, and basically every fest we've gotten into has asked for our film. And so, I mean, it's not like automatic either. A lot of festivals still reject us. It's just that they want to come to us and ask for a screener.
At what point did the film become a movie about fathers? I think you said you just set out to just film people about family?
It was set out to be like that. I asked every skateboarder about that. So yeah, I mean, it was sort of built in thematically at the beginning. All the themes were built in thematically. It's just that the way that the themes were told shifted over time. Yeah.
I don't know if I'll keep this part in. I know the interviewer is not supposed to reveal too much, but having grown up without a father, I had like one phone conversation with him, that was it. I noticed, looking back on my life, that every friend I had, they had a missing parent. And then I had this connection with them, and I didn't even realize that consciously. Is that something that maybe you saw with the film, that a lot of the people that bonded were able to bond in a way that there was stuff not being said, but because they'd had maybe a missing link, so to speak?
Yeah, I think heartache really finds affinity with heartache. I certainly felt that way. Yeah, I was friends with mostly people who knew some deep level of pain. And I enjoyed being around them because it made me feel less alone in my situation. Otherwise, I think when I was hanging around people that maybe were more like white bread or vanilla with their situations at home, it did make me feel a little less than. It made me feel bad about myself, even though it wasn't my own fault. When you're a kid, you can't help that. So hanging out with people that shared my pain, ultimately, yeah, it was like an ad hoc family all of its own.
I used to dread going to friends' houses that would have like the big family dinner, because I wasn't used to that, and so it was so foreign to me. And like to know, like, okay, well, you have to wait for so-and-so to speak for just these unwritten rules. So,
yeah, it's super weird, and I mean, what it does though, it sort of enlightens you to the constructedness of these things, and ultimately to everything. And maybe this is a symptom because I went to school for English, and it was more like theory and criticism. But my big takeaway is like everything is constructed, and we can deconstruct everything. And so I don't know. I mean, I feel like I was primed for that in situations growing up where, yeah, it just felt like I was code switching. I had to, I felt like an outsider, and that I was performing in order to fit in.
So how many years were you making the film? Like, when did you begin, and then when was it the final edit?
I think it was about 24 when I began filming. I was editing all along the way in my bedroom. We got funding late 2016, and then we started our search for an editor. By that point, I had a pretty decent rough cut, and it was like, if we're going to be paying someone $2,500 a week, they better be good. But the problem is, in documentary at least, like the really good editors are booked like a year or two in advance. I was really lucky that I met Josh working on another project. He looked at the rough cut and he agreed to come on to consult, and then he had a few months free to jump in with me. So yeah, that was sort of the big picture process of crafting the film. It wasn't until the last few months that I dug into archival footage and built up the sense of this is just a skate video that turned into something else. And even with Kier, I didn't know him growing up. I accidentally filmed a clip of him fighting. I had to source a lot of his footage from other people that were more his age, because he's 7 or 8 years younger than me. Zach, I had more footage of because we actually were closer in age.
We had another viewer write in. And
what's the viewer's name?
His name is John Dimalu, and I'm sorry, John, if I'm saying your name incorrectly. So he asks, how do you know when you really have a story to tell, and why do you choose to tell it? So at what point did you know, okay, this is taking shape, this is more than just interviews about family, and why did you go ahead to take the final leap and find an editor that costs $2,500 a week?
I think I was ready to take the plunge when I did a fellowship with Cartemquin and watched a lot of verite films and just trusted the process of, these characters' lives are going to lead. I mean, it's all about casting too. I saw in Kier this opportunity to, capture his internal transformation and processing both his father and his race and growing up. For Zach, it was pretty clear that he was gonna have some issues with becoming a young father. Like he wasn't quite ready for it. You know, our second shoot we did together with Zach, I went into the hospital. Nina was getting induced for pregnancy because she was late. They botched her epidurals. She flatlined.
Oh.
It was very traumatic for her. We did a long interview with her afterwards. I mean, yeah, that was the beginning of it, and it was like, okay, this is gonna be a film.
Wow. Did you tell your subjects, and I know they were really more like friends, but that whatever you filmed would end up in the movie, or did you allow them? I know you said at the rough cut, everybody got to see it before it was like finally sort of released, but was that something along the way that you kind of said, like, if you don't like it, I'll take it out, or everything I film is going to end up here?
No, I mean, it was a 5-year conversation about what was going to be in the film or not. You know, and it was like, I mean, there was never once where they were like, don't put this in the film, except for when we were dealing with Nina and what she wanted in the film in terms of her relationship with Zach and the abuse. And that was out of a desire to make the relationship work, right? And in my head, I was like, well, she could change her mind, you know, like this relationship is really fickle. And ultimately, if she sees, you know, the fine cut and doesn't want this aspect of the film in, you know, we gotta respect her wishes. I mean, there's a famous story about Kirsten Johnson, who did Camera Person. She worked in a film for 2 years following these Afghani women, and at the end of the process, she showed them the film, and one of them didn't want to be in the film at all. And so, you know, it was like 2-3 years of work just not down the drain, but that she ethically had to put aside. And that ultimately made her think about, what am I doing documenting these lives? And that led to Camera Person.
Yeah, it's a really fine line, because you have to, at some point, put your foot down and say, well, this is still my project, but then it's also someone's life and someone's legacy. You know, people still have to, you know, go about their lives, and people will recognize them from the film, so.
I mean, there's a power dynamic at work that's so different from journalism. You know, journalism, you go in, you get some interview bites, and then you leave. We're asking for years worth of vulnerability and representation from these people. And, you know, it'd be one thing if this film were about, you know, Anthony Weiner. He has a lot more power than Nina does. Nina, especially in this group, is the most vulnerable. She doesn't have the communal and friend support that Keira and Zach have. And she's a woman. I mean, there's everything is sort of stacked against her in this situation. So, you know, especially her, I had to listen to. And yeah, I mean, I lost sleep thinking, like, what if she doesn't want this to happen? But ultimately, everyone watched the film and they were like, you got it, like you captured it, you know.
Wow. Now the film is going to be released, is it August 17th?
It releases August 17th on Hulu. It'll be in theaters, several across the country, and then it'll broadcast on POV in 2019.
So how does that feel? Because that's going to change things a lot in so many ways in terms of the reach, people knowing everybody's story. How does that feel?
I don't know. I think I'm like dissociating right now, because it's like, I mean, that's a coping mechanism I learned when I was growing up. But, you know, I think, you know, the way that I handle stress is I recognize what I can and can't control. And I have literally no control over what the film is going to do. So I'm eager to see what it's going to do, but I'm not sure I feel much yet. I think probably, you know, 11:59 on August 16th, I'm going to feel nervousness. But yeah, right now I'm just like, you know, what's for dinner?
You can tweet about it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
That's the new coping
Right.
mechanism.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm sure that people that have been in a similar situation are going to definitely resonate with the film. And maybe it'll bring up some old stuff, but I think it's, you know, I just, seeing it, I still was thinking about it the next morning. And, you know, I'm seeing people that are a total different generation than myself, but seeing them go through the exact same things that I went through. So I think that for a lot of people, it's going to be healing in some way. It may bring up some old stuff, but I think it's really important.
Something that, you know, when we showed Nina the fine cut, she relived the relationship with Zach. They had been split up for over a year at that point, but, she fell back in love with him, his charisma, and she was also hurt by him again. We had to process that with her afterwards and her feelings. There was one screening that was at a college in the spring that she came out to, and there was a domestic violence shelter there with a booth that also drew out some people from their community. And there were these women who were twice her age who were saying, like, your relationship with Zach reminds me of my relationship with my husband. You were so brave for getting out now, you're so brave for telling your story. And I could just see it as like all these women were pouring their hearts out to her, that was realizing her story was bigger than her own, right?
Absolutely.
I have dozens of stories like that where there's just been these really personal effects in people that is going to translate, I think, to them being a different father, them, being a different person emotionally. It's been pretty amazing so far, and I hope it continues to have that impact.
We have another question that came in. It's much more lighthearted. And
what's the username?
His name is Nafis Mustafa.
Okay. I'm just hoping for like another zombie dude 420 or something.
And Nafis, he's commented before. He's been great. And he writes, what would your advice be to aspiring filmmakers? So let's suppose somebody's 14 again, but not with a mini DV. This time they have 4K, or they have just an amazing sort of camera that they're.
Do it for the love. When I was growing up in Rockford, being a filmmaker was just such an unrealistic thing. I was just doing it for the love, right? I was emulating things. It felt good to be creative. But in terms of making a film, these things take years. So don't pick something that you're not truly passionate about. Pick something that you care about more than just making a film about. And I think everyone, because of their personal experience, because of where they come from, because of the way they think, everyone has at least one story within themselves that only they can tell and nobody else can tell. And I think people should honor and respect that for themselves. And I don't just mean making a personal film about themselves. It's just that we really need to sort of have understanding across many different aisles and lines that seem a little bit more too highlighted these days, lines of division.
Absolutely. What did you use to film the movie with? From the mini DV to, there were other shots that definitely weren't mini DV. There were.
All that stuff, I considered all that stuff archival. But so I filmed it with 3 different DSLRs and then a C300. Did you outline the documentary, or did you have any kind of story structure to it? Yes. It started out in I've done like 40 grant applications in those years and got rejected for 38 of them. But grant applications ask for either treatment or a synopsis or something, right? And then as I got deeper into the editing, I put scenes on Post-it notes and put them on my wall. I kept a very detailed log that while I was shooting, and that comes from me working in the camera department for money to pay rent. And then in the final year, I moved to a online whiteboard that Josh Altman turned me onto called Real-Time Board. It's a lot easier than writing on Post-it notes, and sticky notes get unsticky and they fall. And it's all digital and it's online, and you can share between different users, and you can just instantly duplicate a whole thing and then rearrange stuff. So yeah, there's several different versions of both written treatments and scene outlines.
In the end, what do you want people to gain from the film? There's so many themes, as you said, to this film, and so many takeaways. It's about family, fatherhood, breaking out of a little town or deciding to stay. There's so many parts to it.
Life moves really fast. We go into our 20s and we get a job, a career, family, maybe. Then we turn 30. I don't know. All of a sudden we get old. But then it's we often experience adolescence as a time where our emotions are not taken seriously. They're brushed off as oh, just grow up, or oh, you're being so emotional. And there's all these epithets that sort of, unconsciously tell us oh no, we need to grow up, we need to grow up. But in fact, that time of adolescence, it's such a soft time, such a malleable time, and it just informs who we become so much. Even in the little things, like getting our first job or talking about our father for the first time with a trusted friend, that stuff really matters. And I think we should give it the respect and the analysis that it deserves. And I think it'll help us understand ourselves as adults. I don't know, I mean, also, I mean, there's millions, and we were talking about this off camera, but there's millions of Zach and Kiaras out there, and not all of them happen to skateboard. You know, these are issues that I think youth face across the board.
Yeah, and I think too, what's interesting is it affects you even beyond 30, and that's something that I think people don't realize, whether you're a parent or not.
Yeah, I mean, you can brush it off, you can sweep it underneath the rug, but I mean, those seeds that are planted are gonna grow.